Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Heather McNeil. I'm the Senior Program Manager of the ECenter. You probably get emails from me a lot. So thank you very much for coming tonight. This is our last speaker series of the semester. We have one event left for this semester. It's the Student Debt Seminar. It's coming up on November 29th. I know it doesn't sound like it's very entrepreneurial or innovative, but it's a super important and valuable discussion with the director of UNH Financial Aid. He'll talk about what you can do to set yourself up for success when you graduate, and you have to start paying on loans if you have student loans. One of the things that has been studied is that student loan debt is actually a barrier for entrepreneurship. So if you can learn the tips and tricks now to not have as much of a burden down the line, then maybe it will allow you to be a little bit entrepreneurial after you graduate. Just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Oh, yeah. I think anyone who's an I2 Passport did swipe at the tablet back there. Everyone got a raffle ticket as well? Great. We'll be doing the drawing for the raffle ticket at the end. I do want to call out a thank you to the sponsor of the eCenter Speaker Series, that's Lake Street Advisors. They make these events possible for us at the eCenter, everything you see here from the food to the books, and we really appreciate that. Wouldn't be able to do that without them. I think I covered everything, so we'll do the raffle tickets at the end. Nothing else, Jen, right, that I'm forgetting? Okay, perfect. So anyway, without further delay, I'd like to introduce Michael Hendricks to the group. He is the, and I want to get your title right, Global Design Director at IDEO, and co-author of Two Beats Ahead, the book you see here. He's going to have a discussion with you all about what the musical mind has to teach us about innovation. And so you will all walk away with a copy of this book, again, thanks to Lake Street Advisors. We're going to leave some time for questions at the end. And also at the end, any food that's left over, please take it with you. Michael, thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Well, hello. It's so cool to be here with you. I've never been to the center before, so I got a tour this evening and super impressed with it. It's a great facility, great program, things I never had growing up. So I'm happy for you. I really am, actually. I'm gonna do a couple things tonight. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my own entrepreneurial journey. I'm going to actually share a lecture with you that I do at my class at Berklee. I teach at Berklee College of Music as well. That is somewhat related to the book, and then we're going to do Q&A and open conversation. If you want to eat while I'm talking, that's okay. You can do that. So first I need to say, my co-author of the book is not with me tonight. That's Panos Panay, you can see here in the photo. Panos was at the Berklee College of Music when we wrote the book together, but now he's at the Recording Academy, who does the Grammys, and he's at the Latin Grammys tonight in Las Vegas, and I'm here. And I was just texting with him, give him a bit of a hard time, but it's exciting for me just to know that the resonance of the ideas that we put in Two Beats Ahead, I know was part of him going to the Recording Academy and be able to take these ideas further in their influence in the world. So hopefully tonight it's something that really sticks with you too and piques your interest. I think Heather also said I'm the Global Design Director at IDEO. IDEO is a design and innovation consultancy, roughly 40 years old. We have 8 studios around the world. One is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that's my home base, and super convenient to come see you because of that. But I want you to kind of keep a global mindset as we go through some of these ideas tonight, because so much of this is informed by not only my experience in the US, but also our work in other countries. I thought it would be helpful before I went into the book to tell you about my own entrepreneurial journey. So I'm going to take you back in time to 1997. So a lot of this is going to seem unfamiliar to you. To think like people like David Letterman. Did you know who David Letterman is? Okay. I was just thinking about that. So in March 1997, I just turned off David Letterman, late night television. And it was pretty annoying because the weatherman kept interrupting the show. So if you've ever been watching, and maybe not because we watch the internet now, but it used to be like if there was a public service announcement needed to happen because of some kind of warning, television would be interrupted. And in this case, the weather guy kept coming on during all the jokes. It was irritating because in my whole life, anytime I'd ever had a weather interruption during television, nothing ever happened, nothing, right? So here I'm in my 20s, and 20-some years I've experienced this and never had a result. So it just kind of seemed like an annoyance. My wife, on the other hand, who is here, by the way, this is Ramona, she was a lot more reasonable and not as irritated. She was pondering, well, how do you stay vigilant? It's time to go to bed. It's 1 a.m. I'm good at falling asleep, so I just fell asleep. But within the next half hour, I was awakened by a dramatic change of light in the room, in our bedroom. I could hear wind blowing, and I could hear Ramona calling my name. Now, our bed was in an apartment, and it faced a window with blinds on it. So through those blinds, we could see the trees moving back and forth, shaking like that. And they started to strobe because the light was flashing so fast. So it looked a lot like this. And when my wife woke me up, I said, oh, I guess the power's gone out. And she said, no, the power went out earlier. It's the emergency power that just went out. So at that point, I was a bit in shock, half asleep, now a little concerned. And we just sat there watching the strobing tree in the window. And who knows why, but something changed. The sound got louder, but it was enough to motivate us to jump out of our bed and toward the door. And at that moment, when we did that, that's when the storm hit the apartment. It was hard to piece it all together. Besides it being 1997, it's a pretty traumatic experience to have a tornado hit you. I remember we tried to open the door to get out of the apartment. We couldn't budge it, even with it unlocked. So we just crouched down next to it, and were enveloped by the noise and the rain and the wind. And then within a minute, it was just gone. It just stopped. And we were surrounded by the sounds of alarms, people yelling, water dripping. And that was it. So here we are the next morning. We turned around that evening. It was hard to see, but, here it is, looking back from that door at the sliding glass window. You can see what happened is the whole ceiling collapsed in as the roof was torn off. It rained, got the insulation wet, plaster ceiling inside on everything. And it turned out it was quite a storm. In fact, you can't really tell here, but where you see that stack of CDs, the wall had been pulled out from the floor, and we had a pillow stuck in between the wall and the floor. We couldn't get out because it had somehow snapped out and come back in at some point. But obviously we were able to get that door open eventually, right? And this is a view of the hallway. The steel plate of the door had been smashed in. The joist had fallen from the ceiling. It was good that we couldn't get out. This event was life-changing for me, right? For both of us. And in some cases, it's what you would expect. It was pretty traumatizing. I had a lot of anxiety and panic attacks after. Did not like thunderstorms at all for years. But there was something critical in the way I looked at the world after this that put me on an entrepreneurial path. And it was a realization that I had a fabricated sense of security. No one expects the weather to take you out. right? You go to bed, you expect to be able to get up in the morning. You don't expect the storm to tear off the roof of your apartment. And so I had never really considered the frailty or the risk inherent in life. I had told myself that there was a lot of stability, there was a lot of security, and then that was completely disrupted and interrupted in my life, right? By the weather, of all things. It's the most mundane thing. It's what you don't want to talk about with people. So once I realized that and I started to process it, it gave me a new perspective about risk-taking. If there really was no guarantee of security in my life, then the idea of making safe choices felt a little bit odd. Because what are safe choices? You know, there's a mirage of safety. There's also a mirage of risk. It may not be as binary as I had imagined it. Let me help make it real for you. We believe getting a degree will get us a job in the future, all right? We believe it, but it's just belief, right? We think that once we get that job, we'll have some kind of financial security. Again, it's just a belief. Once we have the house, we'll have stability, we'll have a place of our own. Again, it's just a belief. We think we need money or status in life before we start families. Again, see, all of these things are just stories we tell ourselves. They're very deep in our culture. They're broad, I know. Of course, they're rooted in some truth to some extent. And yet, you don't have to accept that as the norm or the truth. So, the reason I don't want you to accept it, and I want you to ponder it, is that the majority opinion in our culture is always telling you to be safe, to be risk averse. And I'm not talking about, deciding to drive home tonight with your headlights off or something like that. I'm not talking about that kind of risk. But when it comes to your life choices, the kinds of things you want to pursue, the kind of people you want to be with, the places you want to go, there's a lot of pressure on you to make choices to not do it, right? Because what if? And so one thing I hope you take away with you tonight is that you have more flexibility in those choices, more power in those choices than you probably are allowing yourself to have, because you have all these social norms and all these voices telling you you can't do it. So I started thinking differently about risk. I started thinking not taking a risk was the conservative choice, right? Not taking the risk would cut out my opportunity for growth, for success. It started making me think about life as a series of movements or actions. There wasn't a resting state that I should be in. There wasn't something I should remain in. There wasn't a status that should be permanent. It should be something fluid. It should be something progressive. So, this led me to leaving my first job. I had a job at the time. It was my first job. And I began freelancing out of my house at that time. This idea led me to co-found an art program and teach adjunct at a university in Tennessee. It led me to help found a design department at a tech company at the time. Things I really didn't have business doing because I didn't really know how to do it, but also because I had this experience, said, why not? Why not go for it? And I realize there's a lot of optimism in that, maybe blind optimism, but I still think it's a better alternative. Then it led to me leaving my full-time job, even with a new baby in tow, and starting a new company called Tricycle, with some strangers from England, people I didn't even know, that another guy I kind of knew met at an airport. We started talking about businesses we were in. And turned out we had some shared connection through industry. Now, to make sense of that, I grew up in Tennessee, in north of Georgia, which is adjacent to Tennessee. We have a lot of carpet. In fact, most of the world's carpet's made in North Georgia. And these guys we met from England, they also did carpet. They were from Leeds. They were from northern England. They make carpet out of wool for hotels and casinos and stuff like that. So we found this connection, and then we found shared interests in technologies. And we also realized that we had some skill sets that were complementary to each other. So marketing, software development, design. And so we created this company, Tricycle, and we made simulated textiles. Again, I had no idea what we were doing, but we knew there was a need in the industry. We found shared camaraderie and shared purpose amongst each other in pursuing this, and it was a good thing. It was important for reducing waste. You know, carpets are very, I don't know, you can't really recycle it. We're making advances in that, but all the samples that are used to, say, specify something like this, when a designer's trying to choose the colors, the patterns, those would normally be done on a big tufting machine. It might take weeks to get that sample to you, not to mention all the materials. And we had found a way to circumvent all of that through color accurate software renderings. So I don't think I would have ever done something like this that I really had no knowledge of, no understanding of, had I not gone through the tornado, had I not had that moment. And I don't know what your moment is, your motivations are, your purpose are. You know, for some people, it's, you know, they see a wrong in the world they want to right. They see things that are broken they want to fix. For some people, it's you know, simply just the joy of creating something on your own and putting out in the world. For some people, it's a pursuit of status. You know, for me, I think it's been more of a belief that life is richer by seeing the world in this way. And maybe all those other things happen when you look at your life in that way, but I've been able to grow new skills, build my career, meet new people, get involved in things that I had no idea how to do, and I feel like I've had a richer life because of this entrepreneurial mindset. So after I left Tricycle, I came to IDEO, where I've been for 13 years. And what I really enjoyed about my work as a VC-backed startup, a founder, was starting it, not maintaining it. Right? And I don't know, I think your personalities might be similar. It's usually a lot more fun to start something than to live with it for a long time. So, in my experience, so after 6 years, we hadn't cashed out, we hadn't seen the growth, we had pressures on us from the board that I felt were unreasonable, and that's when I went to IDEO. Now, IDEO was great because I could, as a consultant, I could help companies innovate, I could help them build ventures, I could help them get started, I could design the programs, I could help them figure out how to get hired, and then they were the ones that owned it. They were the ones that made the investment. They were the ones that took the risk. And honestly, by this point, I was tired of always bearing a lot of financial risk. There's a point at which you want to take a break from the risk, honestly, too. So IDEO has been great for me. I've met some exciting people like Panos, who I wrote the book with at Berklee College of Music, and that's led to me teaching as an assistant professor at Berklee for the last 5 years. I teach entrepreneurship there, and that's been a real joy too, because I'm talking to musicians and dancers about their ambitions for what they want to create in the world. I feel really lucky because I'm a musician too, but I'm not as good as any student at Berklee, promise. They are among the best in the world. But, my experience as an entrepreneur, plus as an innovator, plus as a designer, plus as a musician, makes me a good fit for helping bridge these worlds together. And that is something I didn't really understand for a long time until I started to understand myself as a creator. So this was the second big realization for me, and it took me much longer to get to this one. If the first one was understanding that our beliefs about security, our beliefs about stability are simply just beliefs, they're not fact. The second was understanding myself as a creator, as a creative person. So you can probably imagine, because I'm a designer and a musician, I spend a lot of time on this thing, right? And I think the computer is a really odd land, because I think the digital world has equalized everything into some kind of flat experience. So the distance between creating something musically or creating something visually or writing even, creating code is actually very short now. And you might feel this already. You might think of yourself as, I am a this plus a this plus a this plus a this. And that is definitely, everyone's not a polymath. It's a product of the digital era in which you have access to all these tools. I just saw your makerspace tonight, which is also amazing. It's got everything you would want in it. And you can use anything in there. You just, teach yourself some software, download some templates, etc. And now you're suddenly doing CAD. You're suddenly, rendering something as an industrial designer, etc. It's a really cool moment. So for me, to try to make sense of this stuff, I started looking at the software I was using. Now, can you tell that these are two different softwares? They look pretty much the same, right? The user interfaces look the same, the menus look the same, but one's for recording music and one's for manipulating images. So when this observation came out for me, I started thinking, I went from, that's an interesting thing, that everything's flattened out, all of our tools are now the same. I started thinking, is there something deeper here? Not just in the tools I'm using, but something about the root of where all my creativity is coming and how it's showing up in the world. And actually, that's what led to this book. The connection between music and design and entrepreneurship actually began to get very clear to me, because I could look back at my career, I could look back at the perspective I brought to it, I could look at the way I worked with other people. I can compare it to how I wrote songs with someone else or played in a band. And I saw that actually fundamentally they were the similar mindsets. And that was important to my success as an entrepreneur, but probably as a designer and a musician as well. They all started to intermingle. So just to confirm that this wasn't just like a total bias on my part, at Berklee we started talking to other musicians. So Hank Shockley from Public Enemy, Bone Burnett, Kieran Gandhi from Madam Gandhi, Spencer Tweedy, a lot of other musicians, to test the ideas and see, do you see the world like this? Do you work in this way? And we really started to confirm, yeah, that's actually the case. Musicians are working in a unique way that we perceived, and that the musical acts are transferable to all kinds of other things, including entrepreneurial behaviors. So we listed 10 mindsets that we thought were critical to learn as innovation mindsets from musicians to be applicable outside of music. So listening, experimenting, collaborating, demoing, producing, connecting, remixing, sensing, and reinventing. All right, and that's essentially the chapters of this book. So what I'm going to do this evening is just take you through collaborating, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood ideas, misunderstood mindsets, misunderstood practices. And I hope I can reframe it for you. I'll give you an example. When our kids who are in college now, when they were in high school, they had project-based assignments. And the project-based assignments were normally, here's 4 random people from your class that you have to work with together to come up with some deliverable for the assignment. And there was no camaraderie among that group. There was no interest or respect in that group. It was really, especially in the pandemic years, there was like no opportunity to even get together, right? So the project-based, team-based activities really lacked some essential mechanisms to make them successful. And what it usually ended up being is the most ambitious person or the person most stressed out about their grades led the project. Everybody else kind of came along and maybe contributed something. And in the end, everybody got credit because nobody wanted to diss the other, even though only one person did it. That was collaboration, right? And unfortunately, I think in businesses, that's often the way it happens as well. Because again, they're random teams put together. People don't really know each other. Departments are infighting. And so what I want to do now is look at musicians and see how they collaborate and see what that might unlock for you. So let me introduce our characters. Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Beyonce, who does not have a last name really, Jack White, Bjork, and Arca, to name a few. There's also some more in here that you're going to get to meet. So Miles Davis. So when he was 18, he decided to move from St. Louis to New York. He'd already been playing horn in St. Louis. He had met touring musicians come through town. He decided he wanted to go to Juilliard in New York and get in the scene there. He knew that's where it was really going down. So he had met both Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie on tours through St. Louis. He thought they were amongst the best horn players in the world, and so he wanted to be with them in New York. That was really more of a motivation to him to get to New York than studying at Juilliard. So he got there and he went to school, but he quickly stopped going to classes and instead spent his time trying to find these other musicians. Now, you're going to have to put on your time travel gear and get back to a time when you couldn't even call somebody and find out where they were because, it was not a time period where people were easy to find, right? So he actually walked around a couple of weeks trying to find Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, if you can believe that. He'd show up at the wrong club. They weren't there that night. They weren't playing, etc. He actually went through the cycle so long that he ran out of money, had to go home and get more money from his dad and then come back. So his passion to find these other players was significant, right? And it was driven by respect. It was driven by curiosity. It's driven by a desire to be mentored. He could have stopped and played with anybody, right? Because he had in St. Louis, he had played with other musicians. He could have easily joined any other ensemble in New York and started playing with other musicians in that scene. But that wasn't his intention. It was these particular musicians that he wanted to play with, right? So he made that his passion. Well, eventually he did find them. Eventually he did play with them. Eventually he became their equal, and some would argue bested both of them. Miles Davis certainly has one of the most amazing catalogs of a career in jazz. What made these players great together was a pursuit of discovery, a pursuit of creativity, a desire to learn from each other, a desire to best one another, a desire to grow with one another. And they had a kind of teamwork or collaboration that I think is special to musicians and designers and really anybody that works in creative fields. So this kind of teamwork is different than what you might associate with athletics, what you might associate with maybe even your common terminologies of what teams are. It's not about filling a role to coordinate and conquer, right? So if you're playing in sports, we have specific roles we play, like we have positions that we play. We have rules that are followed. We have plays that are given to us by our coach. We execute those rules. We all do our part, and if we all do our part, follow the rules, we win, right? That's the promise of following the rules, right? And that's based off old military tactics. That's the way armies used to be run. The general said to do this. We're going to go up on this hill. We're going to run that way. We'll take the flag, whatever generals did. But think about the pursuit I just explained to you about Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis. There was none of that, right? It was something very different, a different kind of teamwork. It's a kind of teamwork that's about creative collaboration. It's about losing yourself in that connection and that relationship with somebody else to make something bigger than yourself. It's about recognizing that roles are fluid, that one night or one song, you've got the solo, next song, somebody else has the solo. One song, someone decides, they want to solo again, and you step back and support. And then you get inspired because you like what they play, and now you're leading, right? The leadership is fluid. The rules don't exist because it's all improvised, it's all dynamic. And so what holds that together is the pursuit of one another, the curiosity about one another, there's a desire to learn from one another. That's how you get encouraged to make space for each other. In this case, ambiguity is an asset to the team. Now, if you play football, basketball, baseball, whatever you play, softball, the rules don't change very often, right? It's not very ambiguous when you go out on the field what you're supposed to do, right? But life does not work in that kind of rules-based system. Look at us. We're all wearing masks, right? Because what happened? All the norms were disrupted, right? No one expected a pandemic. Nobody really planned for it. Our economic system was not ready for it. Our healthcare system was not ready for it. Our retailers were not ready for it. None of us were. Everything was disrupted. Now, if you approached the disruption of the pandemic with a mental model that says, it's always been this way, these are the proven methodologies for building a business, for reaching an audience, I would imagine you're broke. You're the one that went out of business, right? But if you approach that with an adaptive mindset that looks at ambiguity and sees opportunity, you probably had a better chance of surviving. So that's the musician's mindset. It's looking at ambiguity and seeing possibility. It's looking at those changing rules and saying, I haven't lost something. Maybe I can gain something with that change. As a musician, when you're playing with somebody else, you might wonder, what am I going to hear tonight? What are they going to do? Right? I wonder if I can play better than them tonight. It's a rivalry of friendship, of respect. It's about bringing the best out of yourself and bringing the best out of others through that. And it's all done in this context of change, right? Believing that change actually helps bring the best out. So let me give you another example of how this works. We all recognize Beyonce? Yeah. So she has an album called Lemonade. How many of you know that album? Everybody. All right. If you look at the number of collaborators she invited to make Lemonade, just musically, it's over 100. Just musically, over 100 people to write those songs and perform those songs. If you add the video production to it, it's over 300. Now remember, she goes by one name. We all know her as Beyonce, and we think of her as this iconic person. But I would say Beyonce's genius beyond her artistic craft or her talent is her ability to collaborate, to bring in so many different people to help spring forward a new vision. This album, won a Grammy. course, she's won a lot of Grammys, more than any artist, I think, now. But when you look at how she did it, it's pretty unusual. So she didn't choose artists that you might expect her to collaborate with, right? She chose artists that were very different than her. She chose a Somali British slam poet named Worcestershire. She chose James Blake. She chose Father John Misty, Diplo, Ezra Koenig from Vampire Weekend. These are all artists from different genres that she hadn't played in before. They also had different influences than her musically. So immediately when she was thinking about her collaborators for this album, she was choosing people that were very different than her, that had very different backgrounds than her, that had very different artistic styles than her. But she also had a high respect for all of them. So she said, you're top of your game in this industry, I want to work with you. You're top of your game in this industry, I want to work with you. You're top of game in this. And that was the common denominator. It was respect. It was like Miles Davis pursuing Charlie Parker, right? It was looking for that respect and admiration as the starting point for collaboration. So aside from her diversity of taste and influences, she went straight to the source of whatever inspired her. So, for example, Jack White from the White Stripes, etc. He's known to be an innovative guitar player. She could have chosen any session player that can imitate Jack White to be on her album, right? If she was thinking like that general, setting the rules and sending out the troops. But she wasn't thinking that way. She was thinking about the collaborative act. So it wasn't about her having a vision of a song that has some Jack White-like influence in it. It was her thinking, I want to be in a band with Jack White. You see the difference? It's very different. It's a mutual respect and desire to collaborate. And that's actually what she said to Jack White, I want to be in a band with you. So that immediately makes them peers, immediately makes them collaborators. And the music that they made is different than either of them would have made on their own, had they set up their vision to execute it with the other. So it creates something new that neither of them could have created before. So, she's going to him and saying, I love the way you play guitar. I want you to play with me. I want to be in a band with you. And that's pretty unique. Pretty unique. She's not asking him to perform a certain way or fulfill a certain role. She's just asking, if you put your creativity with mine, what do we get? So her leadership ethos can be summed up in a single phrase she used with another artist named Imogen Heap. Was just do your thing. Together, when we're being ourselves completely and we're exploring this on our own terms, we will invent something the world's never heard before, which was true. This album is genre-defying, right? It doesn't fit R&B, it doesn't fit rock, it doesn't fit electronica, it's all of it. Even has some country in it. And that's amazing that she's able to tie all these genres together because of the choices of who her collaborators were going to be. Again, if she had just sat around and thought, oh, I want to make a genre-defying album, highly unlikely that she would have had as successful of an outcome, right? But if she said, I'm at a point in my career where I want to have equal collaborators that are the best at their art form, that's what she got, right? That's what she was thinking. So I wanted to show you an example from IDEO real quick. This is Nora and Zach on a project in the UAE. And Zach is a graphic designer. You can tell he's pretty tall. I think he's about 6'5". Nora, we'll say she's 5'5", just, I don't know, might be shorter. Not a designer, actually. But what you see them doing is collaborating. And there's a few things that I think are interesting about this photo. One is they've decided to literally see each other eye to eye, not just metaphorically respect each other, but literally respect each other by making it easy to see each other eye to eye and have a conversation. That kind of respect doesn't actually happen a lot of time in services agreements or arrangements when you're working for somebody else. But if you can set those aside, and again, start thinking about collaboration as the job, then you can see each other as equal contributors, equal collaborators, which is what's happening here. They're having a conversation about the layouts, the colors, the messaging. And even though Nora is not a graphic designer, doesn't have that training, Zach believes she has something really important to say and valuable to say because she understands the context in which this is going to sit. And she's not trying to redesign what he does. She's just trying to make it better by sharing what she has. And he's trying to listen and do the same. When you can find that equality in a creative relationship, you know you're doing well, right? The dynamics are working. It's not about outdoing one another. It's not about a power dynamic of one person being the boss, one person being the client. It's about discovering something new together. It's setting aside those kinds of frameworks. It's about using our creative fluency to be fluid in the roles that we have so that we can hear each other, so that we can contribute even in spaces, as I said earlier, that you may have no business contributing in, like carpet in my case. I had no idea what I was doing. But because I was with collaborators that felt the same way, we were able to make leaps that we never could have done on our own, personally and in the industry. It also gives you the ability to navigate towards something greater than yourself, right? Which was very important for any of these examples I've given you so far. Like 1-on-1 is 3 for sure. So hierarchy and distinctions seem to disappear. This is Bjork. I love this slide because she's wearing, in each photo, she's wearing a mask that she has commissioned from another artist. The one in the middle actually done by Neri Oxman's team at the MIT Media Lab that follows, it's based on the muscular structure of Bjork's face from a scan and then built into this mask. Bjork has an amazing ability. She's obviously a great singer, incredible creative director, incredible performer, but she also is great at tapping the potential of other people and helping unlock them to build this whole experience that she creates. And these masks are stage masks, for example, that she commissioned with other artists. I'm going to read a quote from her. She says, "We talk a lot about merging, when you merge with another person, when you lose yourself, and how we don't like that merging is looked upon as a weakness." And she's talking about working with Arca, a producer. She goes, "I think it's a talent that a lot of women have. They become the other half of someone. Sometimes it's looked down upon, but it's a strength. It's the feeling of losing yourself to something that's bigger than you. It's 1-on-1 is 3. And then she says, it's a very feminine quality. Merging with people should be a strength. So she's taking something that, again, socially has been used as, I think, a way to hold people down, actually, hold women down. She's reclaiming it and saying, actually, I believe this is a strength that we have that can actually make us better creators, better collaborators. This idea of merger, I think is a very powerful way to think, because if you think that way, it changes your competitive mindset, the one that's been taught to you your whole life, whether it was like how you're doing in your classes, how you're doing on your teams, and it starts to make you think more about what's possible together with somebody else, right? I mean, we live in a culture that really admires competition. We really value it as a culture. The number of times you hear people talk about being your best, being at the top, being a winner, etc., it's all about individual success, right? You may not think about it quite often, but that's the message being sent to you. And it's being encouraged in all the systems that we have. But if you can take this other idea, you'll no longer be in a competition with everybody else, fighting for everybody else, being the smartest person in the room, being the top of the class, etc. Instead, you'll be thinking more about what you're going to create in the world versus what people think of you. Right? That's really what all of that stuff is doing. It's encouraging you to be a bit narcissistic, I think, versus encouraging you to be generous with your creativity. And I think that's what Bjork is getting at here. She's pushing us to be generous with the creativity that we have, not to elevate ourselves, but to contribute something valuable to the world. I just wanted to show you a few examples of, in business, how the competition happens. And it's usually between departments. It'll be, the branding marketers want to do this thing. The strategists will say, yeah, but our budget is this, and they'll just have a fight about who's right. Or you might have the old guard versus the new guard. The people that have been here 20 years, the people that have been here 1 year. Let's fight, right? This is what we do. You have people that are, they just want to make the thing. You have people that are thinking about, oh yeah, but the system it lives in, we got to change that, and they're going to fight. The people that think they're super strategic, highly analytic, they've done all the modeling, they know exactly what the market needs. And the people that are intuitive that just say, yeah, but I see an opportunity, and I just want to go for it. They're going to fight too. People who want to make things very efficient, people who want to open things up and discover. These are all the ways we fight within organizations. You might do it now, I don't know. But what I encourage you to do is stop thinking about it as a binary, start thinking about it as a us versus them, and start asking, what are the collaboration potentials between those broad perspectives, right? It's not about choosing a side, it's about discovering opportunity from each other. Now, I'll talk about some musicians that did this well and then stopped doing it well, and it's the Beatles, all right? So, when John Lennon and Paul McCartney met, and they quickly brought on George and Ringo, there was shared purpose, shared alignment. They were just excited about playing music together. Paul has gone on to say recently, he just didn't want a job. So he's going to learn to play guitar and write songs. They had a passion for music. They eventually all moved to Germany to just play music all the time, 8 hours a day in clubs. They were just mimicking their idols. They were mimicking Elvis Presley. They were mimicking Buddy Holly. And it's amazing collaboration with unprecedented artistic and commercial success. To have so many good albums in such a short period of time I don't think it's been done since, actually. But by the time we got to their 9th studio album, the White Album, things started to fall apart. It started with just a slight crack in the wall, and that was basically because their manager, Brian Epstein, unexpectedly died. He had a drug overdose and died. And he was the one that kept them aligned with shared purpose. He was the one that kept them focused on what they were trying to accomplish together. Without him, the band didn't want to listen to one another for that role. Paul wanted to do it. Paul wanted to be the leader. The rest of the band was like, no, they hired the manager from the Rolling Stones. There's immediately a misalignment in purpose, values, intent. And so they stopped talking to each other. They started hiding stuff from each other. They started drifting apart. They individually began following their own interests, their own agendas. Each of them had always had their own interests and their own agendas. But for 9 albums, they had been able to find alignment, find some kind of overlap in those and build something new. But now without somebody to help them stay with a shared purpose, they weren't trying to find the overlaps anymore. They were each just choosing their own path. So the relationships were in decline. Then their business, Apple Corps, went into decline as well. None of them wanted to run it. So again, that was losing money too. Egos got in the way. George wanted to be a songwriter, wasn't getting acknowledgement. Paul wanted to be a pop musician, continued making those records. John wanted to be experimental. I actually don't know what Ringo wanted. He ended up recording a lot of folk songs. In the end, it didn't matter. They both made 4 great, excellent albums, but they were not the Beatles anymore. Right? They made these individual albums. And they had just lost curiosity in each other. They lost interest in each other. Now, in a business relationship, there's nothing wrong with that. The thing that they screwed up on was not actually addressing it and trying to hide that lack of interest in each other, right? So that most successful partnership that we're talking about was now gone, you know. So for you to think about how you want to be a better collaborator, these are my 2 recommendations to you. I would say, one, you need to be confident in your own skills, your own expertise, and you need to be sharp at it. You need to be good at it. And the reason for that is because other people need to know what to ask of you. Think back to all those musicians that Beyonce chose. She chose them because they were really good at something, not because they were celebrities. She chose them because they were excellent artists, and they were known for a particular thing. That's what you need to do for yourself. You just need to be good at something. And I would argue, you know, earlier in your career, you don't need to feel like it's the thing you have to be good at the rest of your life. It just needs to be good now, the thing you want to be excellent at. And then the other side of that is a coin is to be curious about everyone else that's also doing the same thing, right? So that pursuit of excellence for you is the same pursuit of excellence that those around you, I hope, are having. And then your curiosity about where those things align is usually where the good things happen. And then the other aspect of that is thinking about differences as assets versus boundaries that you can't cross. Right? The differences in this room between what you're interested in, what you're excellent at, are the secret ingredient to your success, not the shared interest. That's going from the versus mindset to the merging mindset, the plus mindset. So if you do that, you actually get to put your name up here with these artists, with Miles Davis, with Dizzy Gillespie, with Beyonce. Let me tell you one more story. Kendrick Lamar. Do y'all know Kendrick? Yeah, I've never met him. But. So 2 records ago, To Pimp a Butterfly, he's in LA. He thought it'd be cool to have Kamasi Washington, who is an avant-garde jazz player in LA as well, play on a track of the record. So this is, one thing that's really cool about Kamasi Washington is he's a jazz musician, but he brings hip-hop beats into that world. And so he's got a very cool sound. Kendrick wanted that on the record. Washington did a track, and when Kendrick Lamar heard it, he was blown away by that track. It was better than he even expected it could be. And it was so good, so much more than he imagined, they actually asked Kamasi Washington to become the music director for the whole record, to rethink the songs. And so he ended up writing a lot more music for the record, building more arrangements, bringing in more artists, to bring that sensibility, that excellence that he had brought to that one song to the whole record. And this obviously speaks well for both of these artists, right? Again, Washington being recognized for his excellence, Kendrick Lamar being smart, not only to choose him, but also when he gets back something, to be so blown away by it that he sees it as a collaborative opportunity, right? Not just say, oh, that was a great song, cool, thanks, right, and move on. But the whole tenor of this record, you can clearly hear Washington on it. If you hear the album after this, it's very electronic, it's quite different than this record. And you can hear the artistic thumbprint of Washington on To Pimp a Butterfly. So again, it's a collaboration that created something completely unexpected, something exponentially better than it was imagined by any of the artists involved initially. So again, this is just about pursuing each other. This is the Grammys. This is when Beyonce and Jack White, as you can see here, are sharing the stage with Daft Punk, which is also must be really cool to do. This is where Panos must be doing tonight at the Latin Grammys. They made history together by pursuing each other. by offering that respect to each other, by looking for the differences in each other, and then recognizing all of this as creative assets. Now the book, this is my last slide, by the way. The book is unpacking these kinds of stories. It's trying to help you understand that the mindsets that artists have, and this was just one of 10, are applicable outside of their craft to your craft, right? Because it works. Remember the photo I showed of the 4 guys I was working with back in whenever? It was the same thing. We were the Beatles and then we weren't. Same thing happened. We lost, all kinds of things happened. We lost a shared agenda, shared purpose. It fell apart. The principles apply to pretty much anything you do. So I hope this piques your interest. What I'd love to do now is just have an open discussion with you. We can talk about anything in the talk tonight. We can talk about stuff not in the talk tonight. But we'll just see how that goes. And yeah, we'll start.
Do you know what song Washington did that blew Kendrick Lamar away, specifically on the album?
I think it's the last track.
I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah, you pull it up on Spotify or something, but I'm pretty sure it's the last track.
I've been re-listening to it. No, that whole album is super jazzy.
Yeah, and it wasn't planned, right?
It was odd listening to it as a kid and then like relearning it and like learning it, like they actually played music instead of just making it on a computer. Yeah, it was very cool. Let's see.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you say taught at Berklee. What are you trying to do to enhance the idea of collaboration when you're teaching?
So in the course of Berklee, we go through all the mindsets. And the idea at Berklee, it's a good question because I would say musicians inherently have these characteristics, but they don't have the language for it. Right? So when you put, especially at Berklee, you'll put, an ensemble together. These mindsets show up in the way people behave, the way they work together. And the idea of teaching this class at Berklee is to help them recognize that they're not limited by their art form and their creativity. They can apply their creativity outside of their art form. And to do that, you need to have language about how you do what you do as an artist, to start your own business, to invent a new product. So that's how I teach it at Berklee. It's tricky because everyone that goes to Berklee wants to be Kendrick Lamar, right? You know how many Kendrick Lamars there are every decade? Like one? Yeah. So my goal is not to discourage anybody from pursuing their craft and becoming the best they can be at that. My goal is to open up their aperture to know that there's even more they can do because of who they are. And that's my same for each of you tonight. I don't know what you're working on. I don't know what your ambitions are. I would encourage you to think about it artistically, as I've been talking about, because you're not limited. Those things, the stories we tell ourselves about our limitations, security, etc., or even whether we have any business or knowledge about doing something, are all just fabricated ways we limit ourselves. Please go ahead.
I was just going to start by saying we had like a Shaw Explorers program, which is through the eCenter, but our roundtable last week, 2 musicians came and they just did a collaboration. They played some songs for us, but it was pretty cool because they didn't really know where they were going to go, and so it was very similar to what you were saying. They just kind of fed off of each other, and they were explaining to us like how that works and where they kind of give the other one a solo like that. So it was really cool to hear what you were saying after just seeing that in play. But I did have a question for you. It's kind of 2 parts. Earlier when you were talking about how like group projects in classes and how a lot of times it's like the person who's just most determined to get a good grade or who's most motivated to kind of takes it on, and then other people's contributions like maybe here and there. That's very accurate from my experience. I'm wondering if both from from the professor side, if you think that there's something that they can do in terms of how they're assigning projects to make that more of a collaboration project along the lines of what you were saying, and then also from the student's perspective, like with the scope of the project, what do you think as students we can do to kind of make that process better? You know, and still like with the grade and with the students that we're working with, but make it more of a open-ended collaboration instead of just like getting it done before the due date and having there be like resentment in it.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear you had musicians come here. That's great. Again, I think this program is really cool, and you're just reinforcing it to me. On the question about making those projects better, I think the one thing that's usually left out is the time required for people to know how to understand each other's interests, respect each other's skill sets, find a shared purpose. It's usually like, here's the brief, go, right? And to your point, do it next week, have it done by next week. So I think designing time into it, whether it's a class period or it's, you know, between classes, where the expectation isn't to produce anything, the expectation is to learn about each other, to build interest in each other, is critical to the success of whatever that's going to be. I do think you can take 4 random people and make them successful if you have that also built into it, that getting to know each other period, that alignment period. The open-ended deliverable, well, that's an interesting question. I believe in open-ended briefs, but not deliverables. So at IDEO, the kind of work that we take, we don't, this is probably an oversimplification, but we don't take projects that already have the answer in the question, right? So if the brief supposes an answer in the question, it's not a good brief. An example would be from my world, could you please redesign our website to have a better experience so that our sales increase, right? That's a horrible brief. It's assuming everything. It's assuming the website is the reason you don't have sales or your customers are unhappy. It's assuming the website is actually going to make a difference in your sales. I don't know any of that yet until I learn about your problem and I learn about your customers and your market. One of my first projects at IDEO, there was a brief something like that. And it turned out, once we got into the work, it had nothing to do with the website or the marketing. It had everything to do with the product sucking. It was bad manufacturing. They had value engineered it. You know, they were charging way too much money. Consumers would buy it and be super disappointed because it was crappy and they paid a lot of money. So it was actually really easy to solve. It's like, make a better product. The sales will come. Your reputation will improve, right? So you have to redefine those briefs, rescope them in some way that gives you the space to discover what the real problem is. And I think in class projects, it's a challenge to do that because I think it's hard to put those kinds of briefs into a semester, especially if you're trying to cover multiple things. But to the extent that you can do that, provide more openness for discovery, I think you have better outcomes. It's a bit like the Beyonce, like I said, if she tried to make the genre-defying record, if she said that as her brief, it would have been a horrible record, you know. But that was not the brief. The brief was collaborate with the most accomplished artist of this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's really good questions. How about some more? What are y'all working on? I don't know what y'all doing. All right. Yeah.
What advice would you give to college students or people who aren't as experienced, that aren't really sharp at anything yet but want to be involved?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. Like I said, you don't have to pick your life's achievement or life's goal right now. You can have superpowers. Maybe think about it in that way. It's not about an expertise so much in an industry or a skill set, but you might have a superpower of curiosity or of collaboration or of listening, the ability to discover through research. Those kinds of things can be great to be known for as well. So I wouldn't limit them to just, I'm great at retail sales because I've got 10 years experience doing this. There are other things that I believe that you probably know about yourself that you're actually good at, that you could start to celebrate. We call those sensibilities. Just another example from IDEO. I wrote a paper many years ago with a colleague, and we were challenging organizations to look to their employees for contributions not through their roles, but through the sensibilities they have. So for example, if you know someone in your organization is great at hosting dinner parties, you've heard, they have great Friday nights, they invite over 4 people, the conversations go on until 2 in the morning. Everyone's talking about it the next day, new friendships are made. That's actually a skill set to be able to do that. I mean, how many times have you had dinner with strangers or been to a party and not had that happen? More often than not, right? So if you can start to recognize those kinds of things that people do in life, those are core skill sets you can acknowledge and then ask for contribution from. So I might ask somebody like that has that skill to help me think about planning the next offsite for the executive team, right? And that would be the kind of contribution they could make. And there's plenty of things like, you ever met the person that seems like have the discography of a band or the whole, of a director, like they know every movie they've ever filmed and like what years. Like that's actually a pretty amazing mind, people that can think that way. And that would be an expertise I might look for too. Someone that can that's curious in the history of something, someone that's curious about the growth of a particular person, because you could put them on to use that skill set on another task. So it's a little softer of a skill, but it's just as important of expertise as knowing how to build a business plan. Does that make sense? Now your personal passions are often a sharpness, that strength, right? I don't remember who it was. So I heard someone overheard someone here earlier today talking about running. Was it you guys? Yeah. You're talking about someone being out of their prime, and they're like, what, 20? Yeah. Okay. You all know more about running than I do, apparently. But, I mean, whatever knowledge you have about that sport, about what training's involved, etc., there's a passion there that drives that. What you want to start to do is ask, like, how can I understand the fundamentals of why I'm curious in those things, what drives me about it, and that becomes something you can apply elsewhere. The transference. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your work that you do at Berklee as a professor. I'm just curious how you got to that position from carpet to consulting, and sort of how you got so involved with music other than being a personal musician yourself, and then a little bit about your co-author and sort of his role in the book.
Yeah. Well, he's important to the first part of that question too. So I've been a designer and a musician my whole life, really, at least since my teenage years. And I had kept them separate for a long time. I just didn't think about them together other than the occasional marketing with music. You just do some packaging, posters, etc. But that slide I showed you of the software and that, like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? That was a very significant time for me because it made me ask, like, why, if the tools are merging together, why haven't merged my creative practice together either? And so when I was asking myself that question, I just started seeking opportunities to be able to do it, to merge the practice. Being in Cambridge, Berklee is literally a mile from my office at IDEO. So it's kind of the most obvious place. If I want to get involved in music, might as well go over there. I've been thinking along those lines, and I had even met a few people from Berklee, but I hadn't really acted on it until I met Panos, my co-author. We both spoke at a conference. He had just started at Berklee as the founder of the Institute for Creative Entrepreneurship. And when I heard him speak, I just talked about the power of design in the economy or something like that. I thought, man, I was never a good enough musician to go to Berklee. I don't think I know the industry at all. I know I don't. I'm a passionate fan. but I sure do know entrepreneurship. So that's how I connected with him. I said, I know you're starting this program. He was kind of on the opposite journey. He was learning everything he could about design thinking, about design, its role in entrepreneurship. And so it was serendipitous that we met. We hit it off. Within minutes, we agreed to do something together. It's kind of like a jam session. Like you play that instrument, I play this one, let's get together. So Panos, being a huge risk taker, hadn't even had his first course yet, and he asked me to come teach the first class of the first course that didn't exist yet. Right? I had never taught a class about this. I taught graphic design. So it was a big risk for me too. I wasn't going to say no though. I was like, well, I've never done a lesson plan like that, so I don't, no way, because this was the thing I'd been thinking about. So I just took the risk. And that first class was just me unpacking my own thought process, my own creative thought process about how I approached design and how I approached music, the commonalities, and then testing that with the students to see if that made any sense. So rather than coming into that first class with answers, I was really positing questions. It's why you prototype. A prototype that you make, I'm sure y'all are well versed in why we need prototypes. Well, one of the main reasons is we ask questions with prototypes. We make them to learn. We make them to learn about what's working. We make them to learn to see if there's a market need. We make them to learn about the mechanics of an idea. We make them to learn about our capabilities. In this case, I made it to learn about whether the idea was even a valid idea. And that's how I got started at Berklee. And we ended up prototyping that course as an elective for 3.5 years, I think. And by doing that, we tried different curriculum. We tried different methods. We actually turned the class onto the career services department at Berklee one year and had them redesign career services through the methodologies we were teaching. We got enough momentum within the organization to go from being an elective to helping establish a minor in entrepreneurship and making it the first course of that minor. So now, for the last 4 years, we've been an official course of a minor. It's a long journey, you go through, but it's iterative. It's everything you know about creating new ideas happening in front of you. It's prototyping, it's iteration, it's failure, it's experimenting, it's collaboration, it's all of that.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.